Hello, I'm Jonathan Holmes, and I'm going to be talking to David McKnight, who's an Associate Professor of Journalism at the University of New South Wales, about his new book on Rupert Murdoch, which is called An Investigation of Political Power. David, when you were writing this book, did you have any idea of the scandal that was about to engulf Rupert Murdoch's British newspapers?
Well, I'd love to say that I did and I could see it coming, but the sad truth is I couldn't see it coming.
The thesis of your book, and I suppose what makes it different from all the other biographies of Rupert Murdoch, and there have been a lot, is that among the many things that drive Rupert Murdoch, and people are always asking what drives this man, he's so indefatigable, you're saying it's politics, it's wanting to be a player in politics.
He wants to be an insider and he loves intrigue. I'm not saying he's not interested in business, but really there is another side to his personality which has been described as a kind of Calvinist mission to make the world a better place, and in his eyes that's what he's doing. Politics is very important for him, more important I think than previous biographers have realised, who were kind of dazzled by his amazing business genius.
Well, let's go back to the very start of News Corporation, News Limited, with the Adelaide News, when he was a young man and he took over that newsroom. I mean, his politics then were quite unexpected to us now, weren't they?
Yes, yes. Well, when he was at Oxford, he was a member of the British Labour Party, and he even went from door to door canvassing people to get them to vote Labor, come out and vote and so on. And in Adelaide, in Australia, when he came here, he was associating with the young Don Dunstan, who later became a famous Labor Premier. He went along and addressed meetings of the Fabian Society and so on. So he was, in some ways, this was his rebelliousness at the beginning.
And the News, the Adelaide News, was that a left-wing paper? It's hard to imagine now.
No, it wasn't a left-wing paper. It was a tabloid newspaper, and it ran campaigns, and that has been a consistent thing with Murdoch all his life, is that he thinks one of the things that drives newspaper sales and popularity is if the newspaper takes a stand and runs campaigns.
And of course he backed Gough Whitlam in 1972, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. He backed Whitlam, he put money into his campaign, he helped write press releases. Rupert Murdoch doesn't do anything by halves. So he was deeply involved in the 72, which was of course a turning point. He saw the Labor Party as the kind of anti-elite rebels, as innovators. That changed quickly, but in the first period, that's how he saw them. Rupert Murdoch was always has been a great admirer of the US in all phases of his politics, particularly now. Another factor in his change was that he saw what happened to Richard Nixon. He saw Watergate, and he was very disturbed by that. He regarded that as crossing the line in some way.
I mean, that's one of the most interesting things in your book. I hadn't realised myself that what many of us regard as the pinnacle of investigative journalism, the Watergate investigation by the Washington Post, he regarded as terrible journalism.
Yes, I mean, he saw Nixon as a great figure, as a great anti-communist, and Murdoch was always, even when he was sort of sympathetic to Labor, he was always an anti-communist, and so he saw Nixon's fall by journalists. I think actually Rupert also was fairly contemptuous of journalists on some level, and the idea of them bringing down a US president to him was just a bridge too far.
In the 1980s, you say in your book, he almost fell in love with, that's probably too strong a term, but he was very attracted to both Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. What is it about them, in your opinion, that made them such attractive politicians to him?
Well, obviously they were conservatives, and he was a conservative, but the secret of it, or the key to it really, is that they were a different kind of conservative. Thatcher and Reagan marked a period where conservative politics changed its nature, and it became much more an argument about freedom, free markets, deregulation, privatisation. He identified with them personally because the essence of his politics really is that he's a rebel. He sees himself as an outsider.
They weren't elitist either.
They were not elitist. Thatcher was quite a different politician from previous conservative leaders. Reagan was different also. They were against what Rupert Murdoch calls the politically correct liberal elite. And Murdoch has always seen himself as an enemy of elites.
I mean, do you think that what is central to his journalism, at any rate that part of it, or the journalism of News Corporation right across the world really, has been if you like, a sort of populist conservatism that's at the root of tabloid?
Yes. I mean, what he's done, he rode the wave and he helped create the wave whereby conservatism became a populist force, very keen to enrol blue-collar workers. The Reagan Democrats were what they were called at one point. The Sun newspaper in Britain helped mobilise working-class votes for Thatcher. And his populist conservatism had deep roots in tabloid journalism because in its origins, tabloid journalism was, and perhaps still is, something that frames itself as we are the friend of the ordinary people. We're the friend of the workers, even. So Murdoch was always a tabloid journalist.
Against the toffs who don't understand you.
Against the toffs. But of course, the quote-unquote toffs by the 80s for Murdoch were the politically correct liberal elites worldwide.
In a sense, then, if you go from the Sun, which was his... I mean, do you think it's true that it was his favourite son, if I can use that word, in Britain? It was really a very much a Murdoch creation, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It's hard for people to kind of realise that today, I think. Kelvin Mackenzie, the editor, said to the Leveson inquiry just recently, Rupert would be on the phone every day or so. I mean, that's the degree of interest he had in the Sun. And in the 1992 British election, the Sun had an extraordinary campaign, I detail in the book, against Neil Kinnock, the Labor leader. And after the election, after Labor had been defeated in that election, the Sun came out. It was hubris, really. It had on its front page, "It's the Sun what won it." And it was to some degree.
And of course, what we see in the States, where he tried for, as Michael Wolff says in his biography, for decades to get tabloid newspaper journalism working in the States, and it never did for various social reasons, Fox News does the same job.
Yes, that's right. I mean, Fox News is the Sun, or is Murdoch's tabloid journalism in a new medium, in TV. And it's been very successful financially and politically. I mean, today you've got four candidates, or we've had four candidates from the Republican Party vying for the nomination, including Sarah Palin, Newt Gingrich, Rick Santorum. All of them have been in the recent past paid contributors to Fox News and came out of Fox News. That helped make their reputations.
Now, all of that's, no doubt true, but some people have challenged you to say, but I mean, you are portraying this person as though he were essentially a political animal. Aren't you underplaying all the other things that Rupert Murdoch is and that he's achieved, including, his film studios and The Simpsons and sport and all the other things that drive that empire?
Yeah, I mean, I don't go in great depth to his business dealings. I'm happy to acknowledge...
Well, let me put it another way. What many people have said about Murdoch is his politics are driven by his media empire.
Okay.
That what he wants to do, he will support anyone who's going to give him what he needs to make money through the media. But you dispute that.
No, I do, because if you look at his newspaper, if the newspaper side of his business, you find a number of his newspapers have lost money for a long, long while. They are there for a purpose. They're there to... One of the purposes is really to make sure he has political influence over governments, because it's governments that set the rules for business to operate in, particularly the rules on television. But also they are there because Murdoch believes in a kind of mission of his newspapers, a political mission. So he's not a ruthless profit-seeking guy, or at least he does seek profits, but he has areas of his business where that is not the overriding concern.
I mean, what we've seen in the recent scandals in Britain, among other things, and this will probably become more clear when the Leveson inquiry gets there, is that News International had an extraordinarily close relationship with the previous British government and the present Cameron government. I mean, do any other newspapers, as far as you're aware, have those sort of relationships with government?
I think historically, big media moguls have had that kind of relationship, probably not so intense, probably not so political, probably much more short-term, financially driven. But with Murdoch there's this added element that he is genuinely and quite separately interested in the politics of the situation, not just in order to get this government or that government a short-term advantage.
Were you surprised by the revelations that came out about the number of visits that Murdoch executives had made to Number 10 in the last few months?
I'd love to say that it didn't shock me. I was very surprised, I think everybody was, when David Cameron said, he released figures of meetings between his ministers and the media, and I think it was on average, every 3 days, a member of his cabinet saw a representative of News International, either an editor or someone from the business side. And of course, this was the period when News International was trying to increase its stake in B-Sky B.
Even if Murdoch is largely a political animal, people like Chase Carey, his deputy, the person who runs the American empire especially, certainly isn't. Some people believe that Rupert Murdoch's days are numbered as executive chairman of News Corporation, that the shareholders are ganging up against him, that there's a feeling that his nepotism has gone too far, and his political motivation is the reason that he keeps the Australian, that he keeps the Sun, that he keeps the Times and the Sunday Times that don't make much money, is dragging down the overall empire. What's your view about that?
Well, I don't think, well, Rupert's days are numbered just like all our days are numbered, but he likes to scare people by telling them or reminding them that his mother's still alive and she's 103. I don't think News Corporation is about to get rid of its newspapers. A lot of them don't make money, but they are essential to exerting political influence.
And you don't think they're going to get rid of Rupert Murdoch?
The share price of News Corporation in the last 12 months has gone up, I think it's $11. The investors, the people who invest in News Corporation are interested in the financial returns, and they've been quite good. That hasn't come because of newspapers, but the scandal around the newspapers has not dragged the share price down. The other thing you've got to realise about News Corporation is really it's a family company. His family and Rupert own, I think it's 39% of the voting shares. They have one or two key allies that take it even higher. Sure, it's traded publicly, but it's really a family company, and that's why he can put in James or put in Lachlan or put in anybody he likes to run the company after he's gone, if he goes, when.
Last question, David. Nick Cater, the editor of the Weekend Australian, has reviewed your book and makes the point that you yourself are a former member of the Communist Party, that this is essentially a political diatribe.
It's a book based on facts, and I mean that's a way, of course, of avoiding engaging in the book. I was a Marxist once. I don't consider myself a Marxist anymore. I said that in a book I wrote some years ago. Interestingly enough, in his review, Nick Cater wasn't able to pick out any facts that were wrong. In fact, he said that he took my material on Rupert Murdoch's political donations, his history, his long history of political donations to Murdoch's New York office, and they couldn't find anything wrong with it either. So that kind of stuff about people's past political associations really doesn't cut any ice, and it doesn't address the main concerns of the book.
David McKnight, thanks a lot.
Thank you.